speaker. This is Joe Rodriguez. I just wanted to say a little bit about Joe by way of introducing also. Sorry, I was looking down and I saw the socks and I knew it was you. In Buddhism, lineage is important. One's teachers are important. Joe Rodriguez's teacher is Fu Schroeder, and she studied Zen Buddhism as a resident at the SF Zen Center in '79, and later at Green's Restaurant, and entering monastic training at the Zen Mountain Center. So if that's a name that's familiar to you, I just wanted to reference her. Her teacher was Rev Anderson. And Rev Anderson is a much storied figure. And is Rev still?
Oh yeah.
So,
Rocking the Dharma every week.
So in his youth, he was a Golden Glove boxer. So that's probably going to be reflected in your talk today, level of boxing. Going all the way back to Shunryu Suzuki, who was a teacher before. So I just bring that forward to say that that's the lineage that Joe brings forward to us. Joe's a lifelong spiritual student. I've known Joe for a few years now, I think. He's been influenced by Roman Catholicism. So we were actually, in light of this theme, talking about St. Teresa and all the arrows that she took on. Course in Miracles, Buddhist spiritual traditions. He practices bringing an open heart and a clear mind and a felt sense to everyday life. He now studies under Fu Schroeder, a senior Zen priest at Green Gulch. And Joe, your title today, you gave yours a title, Zen and the Art of Being an Embodied Gay Man. So we are very blessed to have you. And please.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here with so many friends and people I've seen over the years. I ran into Albert literally in the crosswalk in front of the flower market, and he honked at me and waved, and then I got an email a couple hours later saying, "Hey, how would you like to be a speaker?" Sort of serendipity, but it's a very special thing for me to be here because I gave my first Dharma talk here. Actually, Albert encouraged me, and that was about 7 years ago, and I've been sort of watching my own progress. So being here is always special. The other thing I love about this place is this is a great house of Dharma. For those who don't know, this building has been in continuous Dharma usage since I think the 1960s, early 60s. Trempa Rinpoche, Pema Chodron, his spiritual heir, and then Isan Dorsey from the Zen Center, and then Philip Whalen, and others have been the teachers, and they have sat here. So when I'm here, I always just feel that, because these are some of my teachers and some of my deep influences. And it's just amazing that this place has contained those people. So I'm always grateful about that. When I talked to Greg, he was talking about, about how Catholicism has the crown of thorns and the bleeding heart and sacred heart, and we actually have a Hunky Jesus contest going on right now. So thank you for coming to my talk rather than Hunky Jesus. And how Zen has this reputation and sort of popular culture imagery of being sort of very placid and cool and maybe even emotionally detached. And when we were talking about this, I thought that was really interesting. And that was my initial impression of Zen. In fact, I saw all the bowing and scraping, and it was just like too much like Catholicism for me. So, but I got into Zen, and I'll tell you a little bit how I got into Zen. But one of the things I've learned, in my 51 years is don't judge everything by the surface. One of the things I've learned working with Fu Schroeder and through, Reb Anderson, who you talked about, is her teacher, and Reb's sort of known as the Rottweiler in the Zen Center. He is really an intense teacher, and is these people, I think, see and feel so much. Their practice has really developed to a point where they allow themselves to see the suffering and the beauty, the compassion and the cruelty, the fear and the love that's in the world. And I notice with my teacher, Fu, when I'm with her and we're walking across the street and she sees a homeless person, she connects. She sees it all. She just doesn't look at the beautiful things. She looks at all. It's a totality. So my practice and my sort of way into Zen has been using Zen as a sort of this beautiful container and catalyst, a furnace for love, if you will. It's helped me be much more emotionally expressive, and it's really helped me have this felt sense of my body. Like right now, I have a small cramp over here. I can feel that. I think there was at one time I sort of blanked out on my body. We'll talk more about that. So I'm just going to take you through a little bit of my process, because I couldn't find any way to express this without going into the past a little bit. So I'm 2/4 or I'm half a century old now. When I was 1/4 of a century old, when I was 25, I'm actually just going to show a picture. Here's a picture of me at 25. No, I'll just pass this around. I was your pretty typical, I think, gay man at that age. I had quite a few friends. I was living in Los Angeles. I was attractive enough and buff enough to be out there in circulation. I had just finished my MBA, and I was working for a big advertising agency on Ruffles potato chips. I know it seems really ridiculous. I am the originator of Cajun Spice Ruffles, for any of those. I had a series of boyfriends. It was very important for me to have boyfriends at that time, which I'll explain. I had a good family. My life looked pretty good from the outside. And yeah, the pictures like, oh yay, you know. But the state of Joe on the inside wasn't so good. Somehow, I felt like I had lost my state of grace. And, you know, in Buddhism and in Zen, in all these traditions, we talk about awareness of our Buddha nature. Somehow, I had lost that, and I wanted that. I wanted that basic goodness that we were born with versus that original sin, which I had gotten from Catholicism. And I suffered from a really noisy mind. Might be familiar to some, and especially when you're 25, you've got a lot of things going on. Part of this was from my sort of patriarchal inheritance, I would say. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my dad, when I was preparing for this Dharma talk, I realized we're all very self-critical people. And they like to share that criticism with other folks. And, you know, this has been one of the things about, I think, human behavior is it's passed on from generation to generation. And I wasn't aware of that connection, but now as I look back on it, I was. And being gay really reinforced this sense of being, I'm not enough. And I really subscribe to this to this theory of psychology that we all have a core story that we tell ourselves. And I think everyone's a little different. My core story was, somehow I'm not enough. Despite looking attractive enough, whatever, I didn't feel enough on the inside. I felt like I was flawed, an outsider, just something askew. And on some level, when I deconstruct what was going on back then, I had bought into some of society's homophobia. Despite being an activist, I felt like there was something wrong with me. And I was really afraid of being myself. 1985. What was going on in 1985? Exactly. So I was coming out just as AIDS was hitting. And I was afraid to come out, but I wanted to express myself and my sexuality. I also was very guarded about with my feelings and my heart back then. My sister died when I was 5, as some of you know, and I had a lot of suppressed guilt and grief about that. I had really never grieved that in an open way. And I also had a deep fear of death. And that's not surprising, you know, you go through a grief thing like at the age of 5 or 10, and it's really scary. And at the same time I'm sort of dealing with that, this AIDS crisis and plague is really hitting our community. And I also have shame around my sexuality and my preferences. When I look back on that, and while I was in really great physical shape, I really didn't inhabit my body. You know, if you think of the chakras, you know, sort of rounded chakra here, root chakra, and then moving up heart chakra and head chakra, I was sort of the other way around. I was like more in my head. Not surprising, I have an MBA, I was a smart guy, but I was suspicious and mistrusting of my body. It was like it had made me this 5% of society where I could die or be rejected. I also had asthma as a kid, and I wasn't all that coordinated. And I had, you know, just a lack of confidence in ways that had sort of manifested at the age of 25. So without depressing you too much, you know, it gets better. So, putting this all together, I felt confused and I felt ambivalent. There was this part of me that really wanted to celebrate myself and my sexuality. But I also felt flawed, a little bent, and I choose that word carefully. And I had a lot of conflicting emotions. I didn't trust myself or my instincts in a way, because they were leading me into trouble. Most sadly, I think I had lost my authenticity. And I really didn't know how to act. So a lot of times I think at that age I did what other people did. And I really felt I was looking for role models. But my community was really consumed by a fatal disease and fear and caretaking. And everyone in their own way was trying to stay alive. So if you look at what I just talked about, some of those currents and threads, I was suffering from a lot of delusions, obscuring that basic goodness, that Buddhist nature. I felt like I should be something more than I was, like I had to be something else rather than myself. That was really a turning point. And before I go much further, I just want to say, can anyone relate to anything I just said?
Yeah, okay.
Any comments? Because I'm going to talk about how other things.
Questions for later.
Okay, we'll save it for later. So my journey back to myself and my love and rediscovering my basic goodness is really a lot through Buddhism and Zen. When I was living in LA, soon after that picture was taken, I heard about this thing called the Course in Miracles. And so I went to Course in Miracles. There was a lot of attractive guys there, whatever it takes to get you into the Dharma. And I learned how to meditate there, because one of the components of the Course is meditation. And I think for the first time in my life, I had really felt relief from my mind. Some of those meditations, as noisy as they were, falling asleep and being critical, like I'm not doing my meditation right, I actually really went to a place of ease and of more equanimity. So when I moved to San Francisco a few years later, I realized the Course in Miracles community wasn't so developed, but there was this big Buddhist community here. And they had been rocking the meditation world for centuries. So I went to Spirit Rock. I learned to sit in the sort of Buddhist style. I learned all these words like Sangha, Dharma, things like that. I learned the 3 jewels, and the 6 this and the whatever. And, and it really touched me. And around the same time, a couple of years later after that even, in 1997, I quit my high-flying software executive job, and I went to the silent meditation retreat in the jungles of Thailand for 2 weeks. And we had to be silent, no sex, 2 weeks of 2 meals a day, sitting in the rainforest, surrounded by poisonous snakes and scorpions. And literally, I had a log as a pillow in my little mosquito-netted rattan bed thing. It was really pretty interesting. But this really turned out to be a turning point in my life. I could see, my mind slowed down enough that I could see my repressed grief and my fear of death. It just came up and naturally arose in those meditations. And so when I returned, I checked into therapy for the next 10 years, which I found to be very common in the Zen tradition. There's a real respect for working with your mind. And I also, my body worker suggested that rather than dabbling and going from Tibetan retreat to this retreat to that I choose one limb of Buddhism and go deep into that. So that's what I did. I went to the Zen Center, and I chose Zen because it was a more physical-oriented practice than I perceived some of the other limbs of Buddhism. Not better, just more physically oriented. And I needed that because my mind was just really noisy. So someone suggested that I have an audience with the head of the Zen Center, this really great guy named, what's his name? I'll think of it. He's
Steve Steffi?
No. He's Paul Heller, who's another boxer, an Irishman, former boxer. And I was having this private audience with the head of the Zen Center. Felt a little odd that I was doing it. And after a while, after about 15 minutes of rambling on, he said to me, enough explanation. How about a little experience? Tell me what's your experience. I want you to talk from here rather than here. So I did that for about 5 minutes. And then he said, do you mind? And I said, no, what do you want? He says, I'd just like to adjust your sitting posture. And what he did is he said, sit as you would sit in Zazen. And so I'm sitting, and he adjusts me. He says, now I'm going to move your shoulders back and move me around. He said, now, feel that. Your heart is now wide open. You were crunched down a little bit before. And this small adjustment really became, I think, a metaphor for the rest of my Zen practice. And he said, I invite you to take that heart opening into everything. When you're making love, in the Zendo, when you're weightlifting, when you're making a presentation, when you get anxious, just keep opening that heart. That's the core of our practice. Really made a big impression on me. And he invited me to hang out in the Zen Center. He said, get to know us. And he said, we look a little cool, but underneath that cool is a lot of passion and intensity. And I really got to see that. These people argue very respectfully. They confront each other. They're people of deep, deep passions. But they also believe in being very respectful in that communication. And you know, when I first started sitting at the Zen Center, I was starting at this blank wall. And that was really hard. It brought up a lot of things. I actually felt claustrophobic. But the more I did it, the more just calming and soothing it felt. And what I really want to leave you with in terms of like the mental part of this discussion is, I started deconstructing my old habits, my old thought habits, and I started interrupting them. And I just kept on repeating this over and over again, much like the metaphor of focus on something during meditation, point of concentration, your mind wanders, and then just keep coming back. Without judgment, without a lot of hoopla, just keep coming back. And I found a really great teacher, Fu Schroeder, someone who really, I felt, had deep insight into me, and has been a great guidance, a guide. 6 months after we started working together, her partner of 20-some years was in a car crash on the Golden Gate Bridge. And I think many of you might remember this is about 3 or 4 years ago. They actually had to close the bridge for 3 hours. She's a physician, and she was airlifted off the bridge. And I think she's gone through 43 operations since then. She was in a coma for 6 months. And I tell you, that was really interesting, watching my teacher deal with this. I mean, this is like heavy-duty stuff. At one point, she showed me, when I went over there to practice with her, the stack of hospital and medical bills. And it was literally a foot tall, and there was $12 million worth of costs. Pretty amazing. But she confirmed me a year ago, and she took my mind and helped me deal with my mind. And she, you know, when you get confirmed and you sew one of these in the Zen tradition, your teacher actually writes something on the back. And what she wrote on the back was dragon mind, ancestors warmth. It really meant a lot to me. But at the same time I was healing my mind, I also was healing my heart. And I think the Zen tradition was really helpful in that. As I mentioned, I put myself into therapy, and I worked really hard on just letting all the grief out. Just letting it all come out and opening. I read Pema Chodron and Jack Kornfield, and really became more forgiving of myself and others. And those people are great people. One of the things I've done is I've driven around San Francisco for the last 10 years with those CDs in my car. And I get 2 or 3 new CDs every year, and I'm just driving around. Sort of, they're my spiritual co-pilots, literally and figuratively. And I also was just really, as my mind settled down, was able to notice people who I felt exemplified, loving people who are really heartfelt. And I lived off this little park near the Presidio, and there was this Latino woman out there every afternoon. And after the .com bust, and I was looking for a job for a few months, I would go out sometimes and have my lunch with her. And here's this woman who just smiled at everybody. And for years I had actually ignored her because I was running, trying to do 500 things at once. But my life had slowed down enough that I actually could see her and talk to her. And I thought, you know, love isn't such a feeling about romance. Love is this big, warm practice that we can extend to everyone. It's great to extend it to someone that you're physically and emotionally connected. But I really wanted to put I wanted to put that love out there in an embodied way and put it into motion and affect a lot of people. So I started cultivating my heart like a garden. I was gentle, but a very persistent and watchful gardener. And then the last thing that sort of completes this is my body. Learning to trust my body took a long time. And I just remembered this as I was writing this for you guys today. When I was in college, I was in the athlete's dorm in this 12-story building. And the next door neighbor was this hunky Italian-American wrestler. He was on the wrestling team, and his wrestling buddies were always around. And this guy, I just remember, actually at the time I didn't like him. I thought he was sort of crude. And he was just really physical. And he always had all these girls around him, and there was something about him that was like a 16-year-old boy. And I think on some level I was really envious, because he got to express his sexuality, he got to be himself, he got to be playful and fun. And when as I've looked at my body and what was going on with my body over these years, I realized there was a lot of deep shame around my being gay. And storing that in my body took a long time to heal and get out. And I don't know if you've seen this book, but it's called The Velvet Rage. My book group read it. And there's just one thing I want to read you in here that sort of, I think, captures this and sort of helps explain some of the challenges that gay people, or gay men, my generation went through. Straight boys develop their sense of sexual self by taking girls out on dates. Everyone, including their parents, validated them for this behavior. Hence, they came to accept it as part of themselves. Gay men, on the other hand, rarely had this experience. In large part, we played the part and took girls to the prom so we'd fit in, all while knowing it was a farce. Although we received validation for our actions, it was meaningless, because at the deepest level, we were play acting. Consequently, we developed a pseudo-self, which wasn't a natural growth of our abilities, desires, and intelligence. It was a self that would earn its validation by others, but our true selves remained hidden from everyone. And the other part of that is shame. The truth is that we grew up disabled. Not disabled by our own homosexuality, but emotionally disabled by an environment that taught us that we were not acceptable. We were not real men, and therefore we were shameful. As young boys, we too readily internalized those strong feelings of shame into our core belief. I am unacceptably flawed. It crippled our sense of self and prevented us from following the normal, healthy stages of adolescent development. We were consumed with the task of hiding the fundamental truth of ourselves from the world and pretending to be something we weren't. At the time, it seemed the only way to survive. So, what do you do with that? And I really sort of groped along, like, I don't know how to heal that part. So I talked about it in therapy, but at a certain point, you just gotta just dive in, and you just gotta start repatterning your body. So I did a lot of things, like I did rose and body work. I learned to give massages and receive massages. I started practicing yoga. I started dancing every Sunday night like it was church. It just really got into my body. I gardened. I got out there and did as many physical things as I could do. But underlying all that, I noticed my physical sense of self. When I was making love, I noticed my physicality. When I cooked or chopping vegetables, this everyday zen of idea of like, wherever you are, feeling that and really fully participating in that. Zazen sort of reinforced that. My heart practice reinforced that. It all started coming together. And I don't know if, I can't believe I'm going to say this being on videotape, but I started like diving into my sexuality. I developed spiritual sex buddies. That was a very beautiful and necessary part of my development. I did a lot of different things. And I went to different workshops and retreats and things that really sort of put me in more of my adolescent self so I could bring that to my adult self. And then my last story I want to just share is this. So for my 40th birthday 10 years ago, I decided to go to this tantric retreat in Cologne, Germany. A good friend of mine had recommended it. And it was run by the Osho people. And it was pretty full tilt. I had to like apply and have references that I could handle it. And we did all this breath work and all this body work and tons of sharing, and you couldn't leave, and they took away all your medications and everything. You were like stripped bare, basically. You had some clothes, and that was it. And it was one of those really intense, pivotal points, and it turns out I was one of 2 gay people out of a group of 25. And we went through all sorts of dynamics and interactions, and some of them diverged in the sexual arena. It was tantric, after all. And it was like 3 days before this 2-week course was going to end, and we had this sharing thing in the morning. And the head of the retreat noticed I was really quiet, so he called on me. And these shares could be, the sharing, the structured sharing, could be really intense. So he called on me, and he asked me how I was doing, and I was telling him that I was feeling a little resentful about the just heterosexuality run amok in this group. And which is edgy for me to even say that. And then he put me on the spot, and I didn't see this one coming. Well, he said, so who here do you have a crush on? You've been here for 2 weeks, nearly 2 weeks. You gotta have a crush. Now, the guys all knew I was gay, but I was like gonna have to admit a crush in this really straight crowd, and it didn't feel safe. So I negotiated with him in front of the group for 10 minutes whether I was gonna say anything. So then I said it, so finally he got it out of me, because there was a guy that I thought was just glorious. And even though he was with the girls, or he had a girl that he was paired off with, I thought, there's something about Dieter that is just yummy. So I said, finally I said to the group, well, I have a crush on Dieter. And so he makes me go to the front and brings Dieter to the front, and we sit about 3 feet apart from each other, and we have to look into each other's eyes. And then he asked, Dieter, what are you feeling? Joe, what are you feeling? And Dieter's saying, I'm feeling uncomfortable and all this stuff. And I was like, I had no place to hide. I had outed myself, and I'm in the middle of this thing. And then about 20 minutes into this eye-gazing back and forth, and Dieter says, well, I have to admit, there's something about this I like. And he said, I've always been attracted to men a little bit, but I'm afraid. And he started sort of coming out in the middle of this thing. So this thing goes for an hour and a half, where they make us sit with legs interlocked. We're allowed now like about a foot from each other. But one of the things I was really happy about in that experience was I didn't betray myself. I fully owned my sexuality, my heart, my mind, I had gone for it. And I've been going for it more and more since then. And Zen has been this really great container for me, helping me really with these three jewels of, a clearer mind, more open heart, and a more felt body. And it's been really, really delicious. And I'm going to end my talk here with this one thing, two points. One of the things I used to think at the age of 25 is life has to be neat and controlled. I'm sure that's a common misperception. So my car was clean, my shoes were polished, everything was in order. But what I've really learned to live as an embodied, loving person, it's messy. It's messy and it's unpredictable. And it's also beautiful. Truly beautiful. One of my favorite Jack Kornfield quotes is above my bathroom mirror, and I see it often, and I just love this, and this is my last comment. It pretty much encapsulates my talk today, and I've gone from sort of the crucifixion to the resurrection. And this is what Jack says. At the end of your life, these are the three things that matter most. How well did you love? How fully did you live? And how deeply did you learn to let go? Thank you. Yes.
What measurements do you think you can use to measure how deeply you love, or how well you love, how fully you live, and how deeply you let go?
I don't know if that's, for me, I don't know if that needs to be measured. I come from the world of business where you measure a lot of analytical stuff and things. But to me, it's a feeling of like, it's more of a feeling rather than like a number. And it's when I'm sitting across from a lovely man that I'm very fond of, and am I able to keep his gaze? And if I'm not, if I have to look away, what's that about? Can I try again and just push myself a little bit more? What's going to happen if I just hold the gaze a little bit more? And so I think it's those little invitations to ourselves, like, can I help my thinking? I recently saw Jaden Lynch, the woman from Glee. Yeah, and she's like this Shakespearean trained actress from Cornell. And she told us one story. She said when she got out of school, she says, I'm going to Oxford and I'm going to play great roles. And all these like opportunities came up for her, and she kept on saying no. And she was poor and broke and depressed. And the next time a really good opportunity came up, it was Second City TV in Chicago, and she said yes. And she said she made a practice of saying yes to all sorts of opportunities. And that's really, that idea of like how fully you live, saying yes. Not to everything, but things that have a little bit of an edge, and just see what happens. So I think it's like just pushing ourselves out just a little bit more is what we can do best. And that's for me, that's my meditation. Like, how can I come back to my thing, my breath? Can I be a little less judgmental? Just noticing that, working with it. Yes.
I think there's an interesting dichotomy in our culture, because if you look at sort of the practical versus the theoretical, I think we tend to see ourselves as being very practical culturally. But the reality is that we sort of hide in theory all the time. You know, if you look at basic Buddhist practice, the perspective is, no self. You know, everybody develops a concept of what this sort of means, but nobody really takes much time to really invest the energy to apply that, to really begin to look at how we create barriers in ourselves, how we separate ourselves from those aspects of ourselves that we're not particularly happy with, how we really never bring ourselves to the practical standpoint of just sort of being who we are. And I think what you were saying was a good example of how one applies sort of the intellectual, the theoretical view to a practical life approach.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think the thing that I think a way of sort of, for me, my way of doing that, what you talked about is having curiosity about yourself. Like, really, it's deconstructing yourself. Like, why do I think that? Why do I reach for 2 napkins? You know, like all these why do I, let's see a homeless person, I look the other way, or something arises in a relationship with one of my friends or partners. Why do I have this habitual response? And not just why to understand it, but what's it feel like? Do I have a choice here? And maybe I don't the first time, but just noticing it, I think, sort of brings attention and allows us a little bit more freedom.
I think that in my practice, one of the things that's really become clear is the self-definition levels that are imposed on us. I mean, even down to the perspective that I always know where my hand is.
Yeah.
You know, it's a constraint that says that somehow I see myself as being defined in some way. Yet the definition is only a passing thing. So being able to penetrate that and understand that those are just limitations that are imposed on us, things that restrict the way we move, the way we feel, the way we sense, is an amazing process. And you really have to sit with yourself to sort of become aware of exactly how these constraints manifest.
Yeah, and I think that's the great, I think Buddhism and any contemplative tradition, just being still in a society where everyone's going with their iPhone and checking their email and text messaging, and I do this, and I'm like, that there's something freeing in just being quiet. Thank you.